Today, I have the honor of introducing Professor Barbara Black, Distinguished Professor at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York. Barbara earned her AB from Bryn Mawr College, not Bryn Mawr School across the street from Gilman, Bryn Mawr College, and both a master's and a PhD from University of Virginia. During the summers, Barbara brings her expertise to Middlebury's Bread Loaf School of English, where I first met her, and she leads students through the Victorian era, the 19th century British novel, and the world of ghosts and spirits in a class called Haunted, which I really wanted to take. Hopefully someday I will be able to take Haunted. Barbara is also the author of multiple books, some of which we will talk about today, including A Room of His Own, which delves into the Victorian Clubland and the role of gentlemen's clubs in nation building. Sounds fascinating. Barbara, I'm excited to talk to you today. Thank you for the time. I look forward to catching up.
Thank you for inviting me, Jake. It's good to see you on a Friday. It's rainy and kind of snowy up here in upstate New York right now.
Wow. It's been raining here all week in Baltimore. It's crazy.
That's what I've heard. I have some family who live in Baltimore, and I have some family who have Gilman connections. So
Yes.
I think we've talked about that in the past. So hello to Gilman. It's nice to see all the Gilman merch.
Yeah.
Okay,
Did you
good.
feel the earthquake that happened today in New York?
Yes, I did.
Huh.
Yes, I did. I was in my house, so we don't have a whole lot of earthquakes up here. And I think this was the worst one in 50 years, did I hear? Or did
That's
I see on my
wild.
news feed? So the entire house, it shook and the ground shook on which my house is. So I'm okay. So it's been a kind of exciting day between the earthquake and getting to talk to you.
Yes. Yes. Well, let's hear, Barbara, if you could just give us sort of an update on what you're working on right now at Skidmore, what's going on campus, how's the year going for you so far?
Oh, thank you. I'm in the midst of a great year. I spend the year here, but I'm also always missing my bread loaf students. I'm always thinking about my graduate students, and we can talk about that later. So I'm here and I'm happy, but I feel this sense of loss and this sense of distance. So right now, Jake, this semester, I'm having a great semester. I'm teaching two courses. One is for senior English majors, and they have to produce their culminating work of their 4 years of college. So I'm really an advisor to them as authors, and they have their first deadline. So you write it, you study and you prepare to write, and they are now in their second phase of writing, and their work is due this Sunday by the bewitching hour of 12 midnight. And so that's very rewarding. And then the other course I'm teaching is taking me entirely out of my comfort zone. I'm teaching a course on literature and culture of Ireland.
I want to go there this
And
summer.
you're going to go there? Yes. You go there from Oxford.
I would love to. I'm taking the Ulysses James Joyce class at Oxford this summer, so I think I have to go to Dublin.
Oh, you will have to go to Dublin. So I had this amazing invitation from the president of our college, who is a specialist in Irish literature. And he's like, Barbara, do you want to team teach with me? And how do you say no to your boss, first of all? I also very much admire this person. His name is Professor Mark Connor. And so we are team teaching. And it's the first time, Jake, in my career that I have team taught. And I'm team teaching with the president on a subject that I didn't know much about. I know a lot about it now. And so this is an experience, Jake, that allows me to go back to those days that you're in the midst of right now in your own graduate study, where I'm just immersing myself in this work and staying up late at night. I feel only 1 or 2 steps ahead of the students at any way. So it's terrifying and thrilling.
Yeah.
And then we will be taking the students to the west of Ireland, so not Dublin. We'll go to the west of Ireland for 2 weeks in the summer. So that's coming up.
That sounds great. That sounds
Yeah.
that sounds pretty cool. I would say what you're talking about is sort of where I like to be as a teacher. I don't think it's very popular or common. I know a lot of teachers who like to plan everything out and know exactly what they're going to do and recycle their curriculum from years past. But my comfort zone is what you're talking about with this Irish course is I like to be one or two steps ahead of the students. So it's fresh in my mind and it's exciting. You bring the energy and, what you just read is on the top of your mind when you go into the classroom, and the
Yeah.
students sort of feed off of that excitement sometimes.
Well, I think you're wiser than I am because you're right. That kind of adrenaline gives you the energy and the fresh engagement with the material. I, in some ways, panicked just at the thought of doing this, but I'm finding I like it too. So Jake, I'm coming around to your position on it.
What are some of the things you're reading in this Irish course? What
Mm.
writers? What are you looking into? What's
So,
the subject of it?
so guess whom we just finished studying is your man, James Joyce. So we obviously didn't read Ulysses, but we read Dubliners, which I'm wondering if you teach Dubliners to your students at Gilman. Those are such exquisite short stories. So we've done Joyce. We're doing a lot of Yeats. We and this is one of the reasons why Mark asked me to join him. I'm more of an expert on 19th century Irish writers. So we did a fair amount of Oscar Wilde.
Hmm. Hmm.
And my partner, my co-teacher, is more of a modernist. So we started with Pengur Bán, which is an ancient Irish poem about a cat named
Hmm.
Pengur Bán. It's a beautiful, beautiful little lyric. And we're going to go all the way up to contemporary Irish writers, probably focusing towards the end on Seamus Heaney, who I know is no longer alive. But Seamus Heaney is going to be kind of our goal at the end.
Hmm.
He's the mountaintop. He's got to be the mountaintop.
Yeah.
So
I know he spent some time maybe at Bread Loaf, or he visited Bread
I
Loaf.
I think he did. I can remember he came to Skidmore and gave a reading. And I just looked around the room, Jake, and I thought, I am in the presence of greatness.
Hmm.
This man is the William Wordsworth of our day. And Barbara, you should never forget this moment. And I never have.
Hmm.
You know how we often don't understand the significance of a moment
Right.
that we're currently in the midst of? I absolutely knew it was consequential.
Yeah.
And so to see him, to hear him read his poetry was incredible.
So, Barbara, how did you, I guess, fall in love with English as a subject and get really enthused by this subject matter in the first place? I guess that's the first question. The other question is a lot of what you have taught before. I was reading through some of the courses that you've taught at Skidmore in the past, and I was thinking about your course at Breadloaf over the summer called Haunted. You seem to be sort of interested in this idea of secrecy and spirituality, I guess. I was
Yeah.
thinking a little bit about the Gentleman's Club's book that you wrote about a room of his own. The idea of secrecy or what's happening behind the scenes. I don't know. That sort of came to mind when I was looking at some of the things that you've taught before, and I was wondering how you got there.
That's really brilliant on your part. Very, very perceptive. You must be a teacher of English. Because, right? What do we always say? Henry James said, be that type of person on whom nothing is lost.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think those of us who love literature and language and love to write and love to read, we tend to be highly attentive people. So you've caught me on my secret obsession with secrets.
Hmm.
You figured it out. Why is this the case? So um, excuse me. First of all, there have been people who have argued that most literary works are themselves preoccupied with secrets. So if you're reading a Gothic novel or a sensational novel or even a fantasy novel, those are explicitly genres that are interested in people's secrets, sometimes secret knowledge, secret spaces that are, as you say, behind closed doors. But some critics have gone even further, that the reason we love to read literature and why we love to write is that we are exploring secrets. We're exploring something that is not visible to us, that is not initially comprehensible to us. I'm sure you tell your students from time to time that you want them to write to figure out a problem.
Hmm.
So I know I've pivoted away from secret to problem, but a problem is something for which we do not have an answer. And so, I think we read and we write in order to figure out problems, something that's mysterious to us or that mystifies us. Another kind of answer to your question is, and it was true of my book. So I've edited one book, and then I've written 3 books. And you're right, one of them is on gentlemen's social clubs in 19th century London. The others are respectively on 19th century museums in London, and then 19th century grand hotels. What all of those spaces have in common for me is they seem to operate, Jake, on this insider-outsider dynamic. Like, I'm really interested in who gets inside the door.
Hmm.
And you would think that a public museum is open to everyone, but and it is, and the Victorian museums definitely were committed to allowing a wide range of people. They wanted the masses. They wanted middle class, lower class, working class people to come into the museum. But there was that strong sense that once you got in the doors, you had to behave a certain way. So you had to act like an insider. You couldn't go in and start touching the works of art. You couldn't go up and hug the Mona Lisa. You couldn't go up and throw spitballs at the Elgin marbles in the British Museum. You had to behave a certain way. So it seemed like there was a kind of insider etiquette to that. The Grand Hotel, I mean, I think that's obvious. Most people do not have the money to be patrons. I was really interested in luxury hotels
Hmm.
in 19th century London. And then, as you pointed out, the club probably most explicitly operates on an insider-outsider dynamic. Who gets to be a member? And the Victorians had this whole concept of clubability, and they would have these endless debates about whether a person is clubbable or not.
Hmm.
Is he a member or isn't he? Not to get too psychoanalytic on you and not to lengthen my answer, but I'm doing that, but not too much more. I think I've always been interested in, notice my 3 books are on spaces or places or buildings. I grew up in a small rural town. It had none of those institutions in its little townscape. And I think I felt as though I were an outsider and that I was going on in higher education. And I had grown up in a town where everybody I went to high school with, practically everybody, was going on to be farmers.
Mm.
And I had this strong sense of my own outsider status. And if I even think, here's my last point, if I even think back to the kinds of games that I liked to play the most, and I had 4 siblings growing up, but there was one brother I was particularly close to. We were always trying to get inside buildings and we didn't break in, but we would go to our church and we would try to enter all the spaces that were off limits to us. Or there was, Jake, I can't believe I'm admitting this to you, but there was this culvert that went the whole way underground in our town. So it was like an empty sewer.
Hmm.
My brother and I would enter one end and crawl through the culvert and come out on the other side of town.
Wow. It's
So
interesting.
I think my curiosity as a kid, when I was a kid,
Hmm.
has continued.
I think that's all really interesting. I mean, I think about this a lot because I'm working at obviously an all boys prep school, but I teach from the girls' schools that come across the street for history and English classes. And I think a lot about the motivation of my students to excel and go to a top tier college, because that's a lot of what is on their mind a lot of the time is I got to get through this class so I can get into this school. And the idea of exclusivity is something that I'm sort of hearing from what you just replied to that question, is like a lot of what motivates people to do things, to excel in school, is to get into an Ivy League college. And then, I was in a club at Harvard. I was in one of these exclusive clubs that everyone wanted to get into this club. There were a bunch of them on campus, but, even the most exclusive club was what's called the Porcellian at Harvard. And, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is famous for saying that was the worst day of his life when he didn't get into this exclusive club. And I certainly enjoyed my time in the club that I was in. I met a lot of really interesting people, and I loved it. I thought it was great. But I think it's so interesting what you're talking about is this idea of exclusivity as a motivating force for people just in general in society, right? Whether it's at school, whether it's socially, whether it's for nation building, as you say in your book, which I think is an interesting point. And I'm curious what that really means, that nation building, I guess, end goal for some of these gentlemen's clubs in Victorian England.
Yeah, yeah. So I decided to write the club book partly because of what I was hearing from my own students. So, they've now, fast forward, they've gone to their high schools, they've gotten into college, and yet I'm noticing that they're still talking about clubs. And what I mean by that is more of our contemporary American sense, like just nightclubs or dance clubs, some social clubs, and increasingly in urban centers such as DC. I'm sure Baltimore has its own, definitely New York City. There are still these exclusive clubs. So I would hear my students still talking about the desire to fit in and to be accepted and to be a member of the group that they desired to be a member of. So, Jake, I'm just interested in human social existence. And again, that's the through line for all three of my books on spaces. I want to know what happens to those bodies, to those individuals. How do they behave? How do they interact with one another? How does the individual interact with the crowd? Or how does the individual interact with his club brothers? Right? I'm just interested in our social existence, which means I'm not as interested in us as individuals. I'm interested in us within a world or within a community or some collective sense of identity. And I mean, a really simple way of putting this, Jake, is I'm fascinated by the concept of belonging and our drive as human beings to belong. So, social scientists as well as evolutionary biologists tell us that we are a pro-social species, that we don't want to be alone. And evolutionarily speaking, our strength comes when we are one of a number of members of our species. That we need tribes.
That's another class you taught, right? Tribe.
Yes. Yeah, you did your homework.
I did my homework.
Yeah. So I'm just, so Harvard, I did my graduate work at UVA, and I did a little bit of graduate study at Oxford, where you'll be going this summer. And, it's no surprise that the top universities have their own rich, vibrant, robust club culture. They themselves are an elite space or an elite institution. But then within that institution, as you yourself experienced at Harvard, there are these enclaves, these smaller affinity groups. I'm fascinated by, another way to put it is, so, again, I'm interested in our desire to belong, but then I'm interested in this particular formulation of belonging that is about elite cultures
Right.
and just wanting to be among the very best. It's enormously problematic
Yeah.
in certain ways, but I find it, since I am a researcher and a scholar, it's not enough for me just to be critical about it. I want to understand it.
Hmm.
And I think it taps into something about us. Now, in terms of making the nation, the same logic that informed your club at Harvard, or that even informs a Gilman man's sense of who he is, that applies at the collective level as well, and certainly at the national or nation-based level. So these clubs came into existence, Jake. They had older versions of them, the coffee houses of 18th century England. There were tiny little clubs like the Dilettanti or the Kit Kat Club, which I love that name. But gentlemen's clubs, as we still know them today, because all of the ones that I studied for my book still are in existence. Those kinds of clubs were invented in the 19th century, and one of their major purposes, Jake, was to give a home for soldiers, for the military, who had come home from the Napoleonic Wars. And to be frank with you, they were carousing around the city of London and getting into trouble.
Hmm.
And so the Duke of Wellington said, we gotta have some clubs. I mean, essentially, it's like a clubhouse in the tree when you're a little kid
Right.
and you build a clubhouse with your chums or your friends. He's like, we got to get them off the street. And here we go again with secrets. They can, men will be men, boys will be boys, and they can misbehave behind closed doors, but at least they'll be behind closed doors.
Right.
So this is not the case for all the clubs, but a major reason for the building of London's Clubland. They called it that, the Clubland of Pall Mall and St. James Street. It's a particular zone or neighborhood in London. It was for the military, and then, of course, different professional groups of men wanted their own clubs. So the world of theater, they founded their own club. A club for men of letters, a club for travelers. So then we had the Travelers Club establish itself. So it's also about, a sense that our military men are home, and they're home from a triumph. They were successful against the French
Hmm.
and against Napoleon. And we have to find a home for them. And also, some of the other clubs were clubs for men who had come back from civil service in the empire, in different colonies. So you have the East Oriental Club, for example. So this is all about providing a kind of home away from home, particularly for powerful men who had protected the nation's borders and had protected, frankly, the entire empire.
Interesting. So that's how I guess the elite, the idea that these clubs are elite came into play, because they had protected the empire. They're home now. They have won this war, won a certain battle for our country. Here is the space that they can go to be together.
Yes, you got it. And the same logic would apply for men of commerce, for example. So also, as we well know, empire always has its commercial aspects. And so empire for the 19th century British folk, it was also about trade routes, protecting ports, opening up markets, bringing back raw materials, all to feed the Industrial Revolution. So it is absolutely about, I often think about the intersection, particularly when it comes to club culture, of surely gender, surely class, and nation and race,
Hmm.
right? So this is all about the constructing of a powerful Englishness, if I could coin a word.
Hmm. It's interesting because when I was in school, Harvard was, the administration was trying to, I'm sure you've read about this, was trying to make the single sex gender clubs, the all male clubs, the all female clubs co-ed. And a couple of them when I was there, like the SPE club, they went co-ed. They tried it out, and I think they still are co-ed. But there was a lot of pushback on the idea that this is an all male club, and like the men here, the college students, have a right to this space. It's not the clubs at Harvard, at least, and I'm sure it's different in other schools, were not affiliated with Harvard, the administration. And from the female perspective too, there was a lot of pushback. This is the all female space. We don't want men here. I don't know. Did you form any opinions on this sort of more contemporary thing when you were doing your research on single sex clubs in 19th century England?
I did. So may I ask, was there the debate or the conversation during your time in your club about whether to go co-ed? And did your club resist, or did it?
My club resisted because the administration was trying to not punish people who were in the club, but limit. So if you were a captain of your sports team, you could not be in one of the finals clubs at Harvard. They were trying to exert certain rules for joining the clubs when I don't know all the details, but I don't think the Harvard administration could actually enforce that because the clubs are separate entities privately held just on Harvard's campus. So it was pretty messy. I don't know what's happening with the state of that right now, but there was a solid pushback from my club in particular. Like, this is an all male space. We do not want to go co-ed.
Yes. Oh, thanks for sharing that with me. I have all sorts of thoughts to get back to your question about this issue. There's a lot that's problematic. Since I'm interested in who gets inside the door, I'm obviously interested in questions having to do with access, right? And I went to the University of Virginia because it decided to go co-ed, way back, I don't know when it was, like in the 1970s. But I was always super aware when I was there that it had once upon a time been an all-male university. And I think I was sensitive to that, Jake, particularly because one of my mentors, a fantastic, legendary man named Edgar Shannon, had been the president of the University of Virginia and had been one of its greatest. And he was the president who oversaw the decision and the process to go co-ed. So he's also president during the Vietnam War. I mean, that was a hard time probably to be president of the University of Virginia. So I realized that I am the beneficiary of institutions that decided to go co-ed. However, I did my undergraduate training at Bryn Mawr College, which is an all-women's college. I'm the beneficiary of a single-sex institution, an institution that does not allow certain people for immutable qualities or characteristics that they don't have a lot of control over. I think I've landed, and I know that you teach at Gilman, I think I've landed on the very thing that you just said, which is I believe private institutions have the right to remain a single-sex institution or collectivity. And I believe, furthermore, that there is research that suggests those kind of same-sex spaces for affiliation and socializing, they are developmentally very important. I understood the value of being at Bryn Mawr, and I assume you understand the value of a place like Gilman. Just last week in the international press, the Garrick Club, which is one of the clubs in London that I wrote about, that's a really storied club for people in the theater arts. So imagine a great British actor like Judi Dench is not allowed inside that club. She might be able to go inside the doors if a member invites her, But non-members, they usually have to stay in what is often called the strangers' room, which I love that nomenclature. Like all the Victorian clubs, they had a strangers' room. So just to heighten your sense that you don't belong.
Right, right.
You're a stranger. And so, this battle over whether to go co-ed or not, it flares up from time to time, and it flared up big time at the Garrick just last week. And they're in the midst of this kerfuffle right now, trying to, I think the last time the membership voted on this, the decision to go co-ed was narrowly defeated. And I mean narrowly defeated. And it's only due to the club rules. No. I think it passed by a narrow margin, but they needed a 2/3. It was something like that. They needed a 2/3. So again, it's a very divided club. And it's interesting, when I was researching for my book on Clubland, because again, this clearly is of interest to you, I had many an experience where I was in the library of the club doing my research, and I was compelled, I had to leave if a member came into that space.
Mm-hmm.
At the Travelers Club, I had to use a separate staircase. I mean, this is just not, Jake, in my lived experience during my lifetime. I had to use the ladies' staircase, which that's what they called it. And it was in the very back of the club. And they said, we're sorry. We know you're a scholar. We know you're doing work here, but you are not allowed to be seen on those stairs. And again, it outraged me a little bit that I had to keep interrupting my own research and leaving the library every time.
Right. I mean, a lot of the rules in these places, I assume maybe even more so for the older clubs in England, are outdated. But again, the right to assemble and again, like, even if these places didn't exist for whatever reason, people in general, back to what you said before, people would find a way to gather, to assemble in certain places. They'd find a way, right?
They will. Yeah, they will. And here's another way of answering your question. During the 19th century, there was a fair amount of discourse about women being unclubbable. That women, so, denying an entire gender, what I think is an essential human aspect, like the desire to join with others, right? And to experience sociability and to experience joy and pleasure in a group. So there was pretty sexist discourse about that. Like, not only should women not have clubs, but they didn't need them and they wouldn't even want them.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was the really dark side, I felt, of an all-male, what I called associational culture. So again, they're hanging out, they're associating with one another. What eventually happened in my own little 19th century London that I care so much about is eventually women figured out and they started to establish their own clubs.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that seems fair. And there are all women's clubs still to this day. So I like that there's a range. Single sex clubs for both men, and then over here, women, but also co-ed clubs.
So, Barbara, let me change topics on you a little bit. I find this really interesting. I want to read your book, A Room of His Own, because it's all interesting. One last thing, we were at Yale University a couple of weeks. I took the Model UN group from Gilman up there, and we were walking by Skull and Bones, which is fascinating because it's right in the middle of Yale's campus, but it's super dark. It looks like a secret society when you walk by, or you want to go up and knock on the door, look in the window, but fascinating stuff. So I'm really interested in this conversation. My other question is just about, I guess, the state of, and this is maybe a long conversation, but we can see where it goes, the state of higher education and teaching the humanities today. And you hear a lot of talk sometimes about the canon or a classic text, or even maybe more bluntly, like you're reading old dead white guys. You hear that a lot in the humanities. And my instinct is I don't like that at all, because I feel like a lot of the classics and the canon and books that are a part of these categories that, yes, that were written by old dead white guys like Charles Dickens, who we talked a lot about this summer. I think that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater a lot when it comes to knowledge and the human experience and the pleasures of reading and the depth of a lot of these classic texts. And I know that you teach a lot of, old British novels, and you talk about old British novels. We talked about Middlemarch before, and I just, I've read that book. I don't know. I just
Look what I brought.
There we go. There we go.
Because I did want to hear how it went for you, but to your listeners, I will say I carry this around with me always.
Love it.
Go ahead, Jake.
But my question is sort of, where does your working at Skidmore, working in higher education in a humanities department, how do you think about that idea of, I guess, changing the canon or adding more contemporary voices, or not teaching the old dead white guys anymore?
Yeah.
It's a tough
Great
question.
Do we have 3 hours? No, we don't.
We've got like
We don't.
15 minutes.
We'll solve this problem, Jake, in 15 minutes. Well, I remember fondly those conversations. They were never long enough. They were always a promise between the two of us that we would talk about Dickens. Like, how does one teach Dickens? How does one teach Christmas Carol to young Americans these days? So
Yeah.
I'm hoping, you need to come back from Oxford, and in 2 years' time, we'll have a fuller conversation about that. I'm So I often I stole this concept from someone else. I am a happy warrior. So I feel like I'm doing battle, but I'm also pretty happy as I'm doing it, and I'm not too distressed about it. Also, my sense of happiness comes from my belief that there are a lot of wonderful texts out there, including books that are being written now, including books. I mean, I tend to have a very ecumenical range of interests, but I am trained to teach the 19th century, and that is where I landed, and that's where my passion took me. So this is where the warrior part comes in. I feel that we do need to defend these older works. I loathe, as you do too, I loathe that phrase, dead white males. I mean, because it's glib, it's pat. I don't even think people really consider what they're saying when they use it anymore, because it's such canned phrasing. I never got back to you. There was another part of your question when you were asking me about secrets. You said, oh, I noticed that you're also interested in ghosts. And that interest in ghosts comes from the fact that I'm a Victorianist, because the Victorian age was the great era of the ghost story, right? And the Gothic. And, I love all those subgenres of the novel. But frankly, Jake, I have a more urgent commitment behind my obsession with ghosts, and that is just that the past matters. Like, what is a ghost other than the thing from the past that keeps showing up?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not even going to believe that someone like a Charles Dickens is dead. I mean, he's not really dead. He's still in the air that we breathe. If we're fish in the fish tank, he's in the water in which we're swimming.
Mm-hmm.
I am very, so I started to develop a course on ghosts because I found that it was a way to get, it was like the sweetness, the sweet candy that got my younger students, not my graduate students. You folks are with me, like, right? You're with me. but it got my younger students, my undergraduates, to not be resistant to the past. And so it was I thought it was a smart strategy on my
I
part.
wanted to take the class, Haunted.
Yeah, it's amazing. And again, when you start thinking about spectrality or the spectral or the ghost, they show up everywhere. But it's probably one of my top guiding principles that you're not allowed to say that any literature from the past is truly dead.
Hmm.
And I feel all the more so as a happy warrior that I have to impress this on my students because we do live in what I would call, what others have called a nowist culture. I don't know if you've heard that phrase.
No.
A, a culture that less and less has any sense of bearing in the past, that it's all about the now. It's all about the contemporary. And I'm sure you get this from your own students. They tend to want to read contemporary literature.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I just think, our life is made much more meager if we don't have our ghosts, if our moment is only restricted to the moment in which we are living.
Hmm.
And I'm often thinking, Jake, of the past as a resource for understanding the present. So I'm not some like antiquarian. I'm not a reenactor of the Victorian period. You'll never catch me like having tea time with lace doilies. You know what I mean? Like a
Yeah.
Civil War reenactor.
Right.
Like
Right.
I love my house is very modern. So I'm not really interested as an antiquarian would be. I am interested in how it's like both and, Jake. Like the
Yeah.
past is weird and different and distinctive. And that really draws me to the 19th century. But there's a whole other pull or desire or draw for me. And it's the sense that we're them.
Hmm.
We're like, they were us. And so, I love a movie like Saltburn, for example, or I love Poor Things. I love when the neo-Victorian shows up because I want to destabilize our sense of how the past just doesn't matter anymore.
I love
Does
that.
that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you reminded me of a quote that I think you might have mentioned this past summer. I've been thinking about more recently by William Faulkner. The past is never dead. It's not even past. And I was actually thinking about that recently. I'm teaching James Baldwin in my American literature
Oh,
course.
how
And
lucky are you? I mean, sorry,
right.
Baldwin is
Yeah.
a hero of mine. Go ahead, keep going.
And I was watching his debate with William F. Buckley at Cambridge
Oh,
and
yeah.
thinking a lot about what they were discussing and thinking about what is happening in America and a lot of the conversations people are having in 2024. And I was like, you could watch this debate right now and it would fit our times. It
Huh.
would fit exactly what people are sort of up in arms about or angry about, or maybe some of the complexities of the breaks between the right and the left in America. And that
Yes.
quote came to mind: "The past is never the past. It's not even, or the past is not the past. It's not even past." Right? William Faulkner said that.
Yes. Yeah. That's great. Well, and so this also leads to another part of your question about a defense for the humanities now. So not only do I defend the canon, but I also, once again, I'm like, there are so many great texts out there. So my latest work is to bring back, it's an edition of an Anglo-South African late 19th century woman's text. Her name was Olive Schreiner. It had fallen out of publication. It had disappeared from the world. So I was doing some canonical recovery work there. Like I felt that she needed to be brought back into the canon, and I've been teaching her for years, and she's not canonical. So I love to go in and out, talk about insider, outsider. I'm really happy inside the canon. I think there are moments when we have to go outside the canon, but if we have these wonderful humanities classrooms, I think it keeps our students, the people whose futures we're helping to shape, it keeps them imaginative. It keeps them intellectually humble. I mean, to see that like Baldwin was wrestling with these issues. We think we're the only moment that's dealing with these divisions
Mhm.
and these divisive issues. So it also, any training in the humanities, Jake, because, people have often said that the humanities are about the how and the why question. Like it's not about what, it's about how is this the case and why is this the case? If we get our students to engage with those questions of how and why, it keeps them nimble, it keeps them imaginative, it allows them to travel through time and space and not rule out anybody simply because of his gender or because of his whiteness or because he lived at a different time. Humanities classrooms should be cultivating curiosity in our students and open-mindedness and receptivity.
Makes a
So
lot of.
again, you and I, we have to be happy warriors.
I like that phrase, happy warrior. That's great. So maybe I know you have to run to a meeting, but maybe my last question for you, and I think that was a great answer, is about the humanities at the college level, and if you're seeing like decreasing numbers in people.
Mm.
Particularly, I'm interested in boys because I'm in an all boys school. Has there
Yes.
been a drop off
Yes.
in the number of men who are pursuing English at Skidmore, for instance, or at the level of higher education that you can
Yes.
tell?
Yes. That question reminds me of that infamous, I almost said famous, but I'll say infamous New Yorker piece from last year, 2023. Nate Heller was the author's name, and it was a piece in the New Yorker titled The End of the English Major. Did you hear about
Yes,
that?
I read it. Yep.
You read it. Okay.
Yep.
And it's so interesting to me, Jake. So I'm going to like shut that argument down, but it's funny that in my own worried brain, I always remember the title of that piece as The Death of the English
Yeah.
Major. And then when I actually come across it again or when I see it in print, I'm like, "Oh, Barbara, it's not death. It's pretty bad. It's the end, but at least it's not the death."
Yeah.
So I think he opens with a statistic, and I'm not sure, this is entirely accurate, but it's something like, maybe this, but I'll toss it out. Like since 2013, so relatively recently, there's been this precipitous drop off of about a reduction by a third, I think, of majors in the humanities disciplines at the university level, at in the higher education sector. So it's something really terrifying like that. And when I talk to all my friends who teach anywhere else, they across the board say that their number of English majors is dropping. I think you could also gender that in the kind of rush towards STEM, that the promise or the allure, the promise that STEM disciplines seem to hold out to potential majors is even more attractive to men as opposed to women.
Hmm.
Now, it's interesting at Skidmore. I'll just speak anecdotally. I'll speak about Skidmore. We have lost some majors, but we are remaining strong, actually. I think of us as a kind of oasis within this larger national and international landscape.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure. It must have something to do with the kind of students who go to Skidmore. But when I talk to my friends who teach at other select liberal arts colleges in the Northeast, they are bemoaning a precipitous drop off.
Hmm.
So I don't know what's going on at Skidmore. And I just think that we have to remain, again, I'm sorry to bring up Happy Warriors one more time. What I really disliked about the Heller piece, and it's a whole subgenre now, the kind of panic narrative or the crisis narrative about the humanities, that needs to be faced. It needs to be, head on. I don't want to put my head in the proverbial sand, but I think there are so many other kinds of arguments that we need to make and can make in defense of the humanities. So I try as much as possible to remind myself and my students of the joys, the strengths, the advantages of the humanities. And now with the thing that we're all talking about, Jake, with generative AI it's not even on the horizon, it's here, right? It is here. I've read so many encouraging and hope. Hope is always a choice. Hope is not an easy emotional stance to take. It requires discipline.
Mm-hmm.
So again, back to the happy warrior, right? This is not just a yoga pose. It's like an existential ontological position. I've read studies that suggest with generative AI and robots, that presence of certain technologies will make us have to rethink our species, like who we are, what are our unique capabilities as a species. And when we get those kinds of answers, I think it makes the humanities like kind of the savior, the force that is going to help us deal with the really big questions that we have ahead of us. So this is a classic distinction. We're all familiar with this, like generative AI. It generates images, but it's not an imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Generative AI, it can generate ideas, but it's not a human mind. Now, what does that human imagination or human mind, what is it capable of? It's capable of communication. It's capable of collaboration. It's capable of negotiation between people. There's my interest in our social existence again, right? And it's capable, this is a huge one for me, as it is for many humanists. Our human capacity is great when it comes to empathy. We do have that ability. So I think none of those aspects or those unique human capabilities, they're not solely tapped into or trained in the STEM. And in fact, I don't think they're as well trained and as fully developed in STEM as they are in the humanities. The current, and I'm blanking on the president's name, but the current president of Columbia University has this quote that I've read, and it has stayed with me. It's another quote that stays with a person. And the president said something like, the job of the humanities in the past was to provide knowledge. And the president went on like, the point of the humanities today is to train the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know what that looks like. I've been thinking about that for my own classroom. Like I'm training the hearts of my students.
It's an important job.
But I find it tantalizing. I find it intriguing as a, I don't know, a credo or a mandate to keep us going in the humanities classrooms.
Love that.
I wish I had said it.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
But all I did is I kind of butchered it. I kind of messed it up a little bit.
Training the hearts.
And I do want to say also something, just a little happy story from the front lines of higher education. So Jake, and it's a confession, we have to keep it between the two of us and whoever will listen to this, because I don't want it to get out at Skidmore on the campus. I was afraid to offer an undergraduate version of the 19th century British novel course that I offered last summer at Loaf. I was afraid that no one would sign up for it. And I'm remembering in that Heller piece, again, which was hellish, appropriate last name for this author, in the New Yorker, he had this line in it that just gave me nightmares, Jake. It said something like, teaching the humanities is like trying to land Middlemarch. No, sorry, teaching Middlemarch. Let me start that over again. Teaching Middlemarch is like trying to land a 747 on a rural airstrip.
Mm-hmm.
He was essentially saying it's become an unteachable novel. And so I made a vow with myself that I would never teach a novel course without Middlemarch in it. So I had a bind. I had an ordeal, an ethical challenge before me, Jake. Do I be brave and offer this course because I have to have Middlemarch in it? Or do I listen to Nathan Heller, who's saying you can't possibly teach Middlemarch anymore? Well, it's on the list. It's in the course description. Yesterday, the course became fully enrolled.
Wow.
With all seniors. Juniors and sophomores haven't even registered yet. So I will probably have a waiting list. So to the teachers who might listen to this conversation, and to you, I would say, let's make sure that we don't underestimate our students' curiosity and their willingness to read actually dead white authors. I sometimes think it's a narrative that we generate among ourselves as teachers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll let you know next year how this course went, but yeah.
That's great to hear. Good for you. Barbara, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a fun conversation. I wish we had more time because I have a lot to say on the AI stuff. I'm seeing a lot on the high school level, but I hope to continue our conversation, maybe not this summer because we will be in separate places, but soon. So thank you for your time.
That
It's great to
sounds
see you.
Okay, thank you, Jake.
Appreciate it. Thank you.